Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying this lovely festival. I know I really enjoyed the food because it's free and just yummy. I just first want to say thank you so much to the North Face and Memphis Rocks for putting on this wonderful event, as well as welcoming my organization and letting me take some time to chit chat with you guys and all that stuff this morning. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Jason Traylor. I am from Atlanta. So is there anyone from Atlanta, Georgia? Anyone out there? Hey! So been climbing for about 13 years now, and I decided to create an organization called Climb Beyond the Barrier, or CBB for short. And we put on inclusive programming for underrepresented communities within the climbing space to increase their participation and their representation within that space. So kind of how that became to be, I would say I started first when I started climbing. So when I started climbing, I didn't see a lot of people like myself. Just a quick question, has anyone in this space felt like they were othered in a space? Not specifically talking about climbing, but maybe it's in the workplace and school, and it could be for like your race, your gender, just for who you are and things that you can't control, right? So that's how I felt a lot of times when I went to the climbing gym. I didn't see a lot of black people. I didn't see any really queer people, and especially not black and queer, right? Woo! Any black and queer people? Hey, that's what I'm talking about. And so to be consistently felt like I was being othered and going to spaces. For an example, I went to a festival recently, and I was at Sterling Ropes tent, and they have this really cool like rope wash that you can use to clean your ropes. And I like to take care of my ropes, and I'm a preferably rope climber. Any rope climbers? Hey, I am a rope climber, so I like to maintain the items that will keep me safe, right? And so I was in that tent, and this guy came up to me, and he was like, "Oh, I don't really care about cleaning my ropes," and I was like, "Oh, like I just like my hands to not be like blackened by the rope," and he was like, "Oh, you don't want the only white skin on you to not be black?" Right. It's things like that. So just consistently like having these types of moments and feeling othered and less than, right? Um, and so with like obviously the pandemic, there was a lot of like loneliness happening. I felt lonely. Anyone else lonely during that pandemic? You remember that time a couple years ago? So I just felt lonely, and like I just really wanted a place to feel like at home, like with people like myself. And so when things started to open up, I started to like, oh, I really wish there was like, maybe like a queer climbing group in Atlanta, or like a BIPOC space or something within that climbing space, because that's predominantly what I do. And so there was a new gym that was opening up called the Overlook in Atlanta. If you haven't been to Atlanta and you haven't climbed at the Overlook, I really suggest you giving them a little day pass trip over there. And so they reached out on their social media account and was like, hey, we want to be part of the space of the climbing community, as well as the Weston community where they're located. Is there anything that we could potentially do or collaborate with? And so I reached out and I was like, hey, I think it'd be cool if like we started like a queer climbing group or even a BIPOC climbing group. And then they reached out back to me and was like, that's a good idea. Would you be interested in helping us start that? And I was like, sure. I've never like really done any like groups, like leading things of that nature, so I was like a little nervous because this is something I'm not used to. Also, I don't know, anyone else suffer from imposter syndrome out there? Yeah, all right. It sucks. And I sometimes get that a lot sometimes with the things I do, because like, who am I? I'm just a guy, right? And so anyways, I started this group called Unharnessed Pride in 2021. And it was like really great to have like a space of like queer individuals just to climb and hang out together and whatnot. And through that, I started doing more programming, like with the outdoors, like taking people outdoors, which is also kind of crazy because, I don't know, I'm not like an AMGA guide or anything, or any certifications, but I was like, I really want to introduce people to the outdoors because like there are so many people who come to these groups who don't really have that experience or have the equipment or anything like that, and I have the experience in the equipment. And so we started doing like outdoor programming and things like that, and then people were just like, hey, we want more, hey, we want more. And I was like, okay. And so from that, I started to put on more programming. So the next thing I decided to do was this queer climbing and camping trip in Chattanooga called the Chattanooga Kiki. Super fun. And just from that, just things were starting to snowball and like create more and more things. And then I got the ideal of creating this really cool festival called the Alabama Potluck. So that came to be, sorry, I'm like story after story. That came to be, I was working with one of my coworkers, and they wanted to start competing in the paraclimbing, like climbing circuit. They are an adaptive climber. They use a prosthetic limb to just live their life. Adaptive climbers? Hey, that's what I'm talking about. And so I started working with them and training them to, be like a more technical climber and things like that. And some of the cool things like I felt like I was able to convey to them was that their prosthetic was not like a weight, like an extra thing to them, but it was like an extension of their body. And just like having them realize that I'm not, just because I have this prosthetic doesn't mean like it's just like a weight, carrying, something like that. And so seeing those breakthroughs and like having them like, be more within the adaptive space and like competing, I started going to some of the adaptive climbing comps. And being a part of that community, even though I don't identify as an adaptive climber, but being a part of that community, I started to see a lot of parallels of like the communities and the things that I've gone through in my lived experiences and listening to their lived experiences and seeing like, oh, even though I don't have that same exact lived experience, but I have a lived experience that parallels that, but at the end of the day made me feel that same like hurt, that same like otherness, right? And just like this really cool feeling of like, wow, this is so cool. I want other people to experience this thing that I'm experiencing right now. And so I came up with this grassroots climbing festival called the Alabama Potluck. So the Alabama Potluck is a grassroots climbing festival about, again, bringing underrepresented communities together. So communities such as BIPOC, LGBT, women, adaptive, plus size, sober, mental health. Basically, if you have a barrier to entry, this is a place for you. And we have cool clinics that are different types of clinics. They're not all climbing related, because there's a lot of climbing festivals out there that are like climbing. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump on the stage. Like very climbing oriented. And I wanted to create a space that's like more intentional, more about like talking about things, or just like, learn other things about sustainability. Like there is a cool class that my friend Mariah teaches. It's called Mending Your Own Business. And she is her own woman. She has her own business about creating climbing clothes, as well as she does work like that for movies and stuff. And so super knowledgeable about sewing and mending things. And it's about like mending like your own patches like on your clothes. So you like, you rip your pants and you're like, I have to buy new pants. Not the case. You can learn how to patch those pants up. And then there's other like mental health clinics that we do. We have yoga. We partner with Lululemon. So really cool thing is they give us Lululemon. And we partner with them, and they give us free yoga mats. So basically, after yoga, you get a free Lululemon yoga mat. And I don't know if you've ever done yoga or anything on a Lululemon mat, you never want to go back to any other mat. But there's like a lot of diverse classes and clinics that people can take, and it's all included with that festival, because a lot of festivals are out there. It's like you pay a lot for the festival, and then for each clinic you have to pay more on top of that. And so we want to like kind of take that away, and just so people can really fully experience that space, right? And so with that, we're starting to see in like all of our programming like a really big increase. And we want to think of like that increase like due to a couple of things. And so this is also kind of like a thing that you can take with you if you're ever planning any like kind of affinity spaces, or like if you're like friend group, you want to make it more diverse and things like that. So I'm going to give you 3 takeaways to make more inclusive and equitable spaces in general. So the very first thing is kind of like a little pyramid. Whatever I do, I think of the intentionality. So you have to be intentional about what you're doing, correct? So if you're ever going to like any kind of event or someone invites you somewhere, and if you don't go, you know you're not missed, right? That's not like a great feeling. And so what I want to create is a space that like if you don't show up, you are missed and you feel like you're part of that space. Because it takes so much to be like, oh, we want you to be part of it, but you're not going to do the work to make them feel part of that, right? And so I want everyone that comes into that space, makes them feel like this is a place for me, I feel welcome, I feel seen. One thing I always like to do personally is I always want to meet with everyone that comes in and have like at least one intentional conversation with every person that is coming in. Which, you know, is starting to get hard because our spaces are growing. The Chattanooga Kiki and Work the Red increased by over 100% from the year prior. And then the Alabama Potluck increased by 300%, which is, woo! So we went from 30 people the first year, and then this year, which was the second year, to 120, right? Another cool thing about the potluck, we also partner with Catalyst Sports to really make that space more accessible for like adaptive climbers too as well. And so it's just really cool to see, again, all that growth. And again, that leads to making sure that like if I'm inviting you, I want you to be there, correct? And even though I may not physically, like, here's your invitation, but I really want to invite your community. I want to know about your lived experience, right? And that's what it's all about, right? And so, intentionality. The next step is accessibility, right? And a lot of people think of accessibility as like a physical thing, which it is. You know, there is accessibility with making sure you can access the space. Because if you can't access the space, is it accessible, right? And so what I was talking about with partnering with Catalyst Sports, because I intentionally want people of the adaptive community to be there. And so I realized I don't have all the resources, money, the equipment, especially the knowledge, right? And that's another thing with like creating spaces and things like that, is it's more than, you have to sometimes set your personality, your like knowledge and your stuff aside, and letting other people who have more of knowledge and just more expertise in that field or whatever the case may be to help elevate that space, right? So it's like actually a little bit of humility, right? And so partnering with them and making sure that the space is as accessible as possible. And then also having them teach our clinic leaders about ways to talk and interact with adaptive climbers, as well as, is my clinic actually fully as accessible as it can be, right? And so having them get their expertise, having them provide equipment, having them to just like disperse information through the community really help bring this in a lot more people, and also, again, making sure that it is accessible. Another thing when it comes to accessibility is if I don't feel comfortable in that space, is that accessible, right? So all of our programming is sober programming. One is because I am taking a bunch of people out, and I want to make sure everyone is sober when they're on the wall, in the space, like liability-wise, right? But we also realize that people who are part of the who are in recovery are like, a lot of climbing spaces are like, oh, let's party, let's, boom, 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 right? And so we want to try to like avoid that, and we want to make sure that the space feels comfortable for them as well and beneficial to them, right? And so that's another reason why it's like all sober programming. So it's more than, again, physically assessing it, physically assessing the space, but is it also a way that I feel comfortable with being in that space? So that's accessibility, right? And then the next thing is representation, right? And that can be in the people that are coming to the space, as well as the people leading the space, right? If I'm putting on a space like, oh, we're putting on a diverse festival and literally all of us look the same, who are leading the space, does that feel like representative of what we want in the space, right? Um, or we have like, social media and putting on pictures and things like that, and you only see one type of person or like similar type of people, correct? And so representation is very important. And so with that, you have to be intentional about who you're helping like create these spaces. So we go back to intentionality. So that's why I use intentionality as like the base of that foundation, right? Um, and so making sure people see themselves in that space, as well as the people leading that space are also different people from different backgrounds as well. And also with that allows different input as well when it comes to like leading that space. So that's why it's important to have a represented, like a diverse group of leaders, correct? And also the cool thing about representation is sometimes you don't realize the impact it has. So one story, it's back when I was doing an Unharnessed Pride meetup in Cherokee Rock Village or Sand Rock in Alabama. So we are just out there being our queer out loud selves. Some of us have like rainbow shirts on and just very evidently queer, right? And this little person, they're about like, I said little person, they're 13, so child to me. They're about like the age of 13, and they're from that area, which is very rural and not as welcoming for people who are outside that majority, correct? And they saw us, and they came up to us, and again, it seems terrifying to come up to a group of adults that you don't know, and being like 13 as well. And they were like, hey, like, I just want to let you know, like, I am queer, and I've never told this to anyone, especially my family, because I know, like, I would not be welcomed in that space and in my community. And this is the first time I've ever seen anyone like you all in this space, and I come here all the time. And to have that, like, someone, again, who's young, come out to you as a random stranger, and you just don't understand sometimes the impact of what you're doing until like maybe someone says it. And even sometimes people don't say that impact. It doesn't mean it's not affecting them, right? And it was like really cool. They got to climb with us, and we took pictures with them. And it was just like this magical experience to create that space for that one time for that person, because this is probably one of the only times they felt to be like their true selves, right, in that space. And so that's why representation matters, all right? So to kind of like wrap this up, because I know like we all want to go climb some rocks. So to kind of wrap all of this up, so just some key takeaways. So remember, when you're making more intentional space, more diverse and equitable spaces, think of intentionality. And making sure that your actions and like what you're thinking and what you're doing is intentional and matching what you're saying, right? The next step is making sure that that space is accessible. And again, that could be physically accessible, but also like mentally accessible as well, and making people feel comfortable. And third is making sure that what you're doing is representative of the space you want to create, but also just representative in total. All right, well, thank you again for listening to me yap today. I can't wait to meet some of you guys. I am leading like the beginner bouldering meetup thing today, so if you want to climb some rocks with me or whatever the case may be, but I do look forward to talking with you guys. And again, thank you so much to North Face and Memphis Rocks for putting this wonderful event on.